Welcome to Season 4 of The Chess Angle. I'm excited to be back. With the start of a new season, I normally provide some programming notes and share some thoughts on the direction of the podcast, but I'm going to hold off on those remarks and save them for my first solo episode. My guest this week is Grandmaster Alex Lenderman. Alex is a fellow New Yorker who currently resides in Brooklyn, where he was a former member of the famous chess team at Edward R. Murrow High School that won 4 straight national high school titles. This was depicted in the 2007 book, The Kings of New York, and many of you may remember that Alex was the winner of the 2021 U.S. Open. In addition to playing, Alex is also active as a chess coach for both kids and adults. Alex and I covered a number of topics, but I found his insight on why adult improvers and club players have trouble getting better to be particularly fascinating. That conversation's coming right up, so stick around.
Welcome to The Chess Angle. This is not your typical chess podcast. If you're an amateur or club-level player, The Chess Angle is for you. Our content is aimed at busy adults who are serious about the game but have limited study time. Featured guests include both amateur and titled players alike. And now, here's your host, director of the Long Island Chess Club, Neil Bellon.
Hey, Alex, good to see you. Thanks for coming on the podcast. I'm really looking forward to chatting today.
Oh, thank you, Neil. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely. My pleasure. We had met many years ago on Long Island when you were younger and playing in some of the clubs. So we'll get to that. But I wanted to ask you first just about living in Brooklyn, New York, and when you moved there and what that's like. Always a pleasure to speak to a fellow New Yorker.
Well, me and my family, we immigrated from Russia when I was 4 years old. So, we've lived in Brooklyn, New York since. So, yeah, that's just where I've, lived and got raised.
And tell me about your years playing on the Long Island chess scene, because I know you played a lot of tournaments there when you were younger. I'm just wondering what that was like for you, that experience.
It was quite fun. I think in around 2007 was the first time I came there. I came there for the Nassau Chess Club Championship. So for some reason at that time, I was like wanting to explore different tournaments. Because before that, I was mostly just playing chess tour event and the Marshall events. But, I got to the point that it was hard for me to consistently win there. And so I started looking for maybe some other tournaments. And I think at some point I realized I don't remember how I even came across. Maybe it was through Chess Live, or maybe it was through surfing Jay Bonen's chess history. But then somehow I found out about the Queen's Chess Club. And so I decided to come there and play the championship, where at that point in my chess career, as a kid, the money seemed kind of attractive for the first place, plus the Grand Prix points, which in 2008 were quite relevant. And then I also came across Nassau Chess Club. So I thought, okay, 800 for first place for 10 rounds. Plus, I was already doing some things in Manhattan those days anyway. So I thought, okay, why not? And then so I started to come there. And at first I thought, okay, I'll just be coming for the championship, and that's it, like a high-priced event. But then after I played that tournament, I enjoyed the experience there. And then I think I came across a couple of people who wanted lessons from me, who lived in Long Island. So I thought, okay, maybe I can give a lesson and then go and play. So then it became even lucrative for me to play the smaller events. And I don't think I made Jay Bonen very happy about that throughout those times, because normally he would win almost all the events, but then it was like 50-50 or maybe even more that I was winning. And so, but yeah, I was enjoying that time because I was always kind of very result oriented as a kid. And even now I have that quality. And so I just enjoyed to win games and so win prizes. And so I thought, for me, it was just nice. So that's why I was at that point in my chess career when I wasn't really giving as many lessons and I wasn't really that much aspiring to be a GM at that point. I thought I didn't really care that I was playing much lower rated. So I just wanted to win tournaments and it was fun for me.
All right, cool. And how would you compare like playing on Long Island, like let's say at NASA, to something like the Marshall? Like you alluded to it a little bit, but did you notice a major difference as far as the opponents and the competition?
Well, yeah, I mean, and at the Marshall, I would sometimes play strong GMs. They would sometimes show up, and if they showed up, I mean, my chances of winning weren't particularly high. Whereas the Nassau, my main competition was Jay Bonin at that time. Maybe Team. I used to think it's Team Mirable, but I think it's actually Mirable or
Yeah, Mirabile, I believe.
Mirabile. Yeah. So those were like the main competition at that point, and then after that, I think it was a bunch of experts. At least when I was coming there. So basically, the competition was much lower for me. So that just meant that if I can get through the game against Jay, okay, then I would have good chances to win normally. So yeah, that was a big difference. In the Marshall, if I would come, I would sometimes win, but more often than not, I wouldn't win. Like if there would be GMs who would show up, like Lenny Dawson or like some others strong GMs. But at Nassau, I would typically be able to win first or second. So that was like the big difference. I mean, at the club level, I mean, the club players are probably similar level, but there were just no, let's say, grandmasters, let's say people who were, stronger than me at Nassau. So that was, I think, the main difference.
Now, back then, and even now you could talk about this, but back then or now or both, do you change your style if you're playing a much lower rated player, or do you treat everybody the same? Is it more of I'm just going to wait for the low rated player to make a mistake? Just curious if you approach it differently as opposed to playing someone much stronger.
You mean my approach back then or my approach currently in my chess career?
Both. I'm curious if it was the same or if you did things differently back then or if you do the same thing now.
Well, back then I was a kid and I was not a very mature player, so I would often take games for granted and I would often still win, but I wasn't all that disciplined when I was playing lower rated and I was taking unnecessary risks and things like that. I would still usually get away with it, but I was much more prone to losing to lower rated if people could. I was more vulnerable to being punished. I think I won almost every game in Nassau that I played, but there were a couple of games that were quite shaky that I remember. And it shouldn't have gotten to that point. I was experimenting too much in openings, and I was taking unnecessary risks, and I wasn't calculating. So yeah, I wasn't always that focused. Now, if I play lower rated, I try to treat them like they're, someone around my level. Now, maybe not necessarily in the opening. Like I wouldn't play, let's say, into a drawing opening line where draw is okay. So I wouldn't do that. But like I would try, in terms of once the chess game starts, I would try to have the same concentration and focus as I would if I'm playing a higher rated player. I mean, of course, it's much easier to said than done, but I try to have that discipline because at some point I know that I'll have to play stronger players. And the key is I don't want to develop bad habits in my, to be lazy and things like that. And I realize even when I look back at my games against lower rateds, there's still tons of things I can actually learn from the games. And my games are far from smooth sometimes against low rates, even if I do try hard, right? So let alone if I don't, then I can really give them lots of chances. So I definitely feel like I'm a different player now than I was when I was an IM playing at Nassau.
Now, I read The Kings of New York a number of years ago. I didn't reread it for this interview, I do confess, but I did read it a while back in paperback, really enjoyed it. I'm referring, of course, to your experience at Edward Murrow, and you were part of the dream team with the high school championships. How did that experience shape you? Like, tell me what that was like, how that helped you develop as a player and a person.
Yeah, well, I'll be honest. I was always like result and money oriented, and for me, it wasn't really all that much fun playing a lot of these scholastic events without any prize money. But okay, I was okay with it because all my expenses were basically paid for. My travel expense. Okay, the only thing was the food, but okay, it wasn't as big of a deal. And I basically got into the Morrow High School thanks to my chess. It wasn't because my grades in middle school were not so great to get into this prestigious school. So, but I mainly got there because of chess. So I felt loyal because of that to play on the team. But it wasn't something that I was, let's say, looking forward to. But I feel like it was a very helpful thing because, learning to interact with, my peers was very important for me back when I was like a kid. I had some, social difficulties like many chess players sometimes do. And, obviously you've read the books, so like there were some things I said or done there that were not, let's say, ideal. But, I learned from these experiences and I grew as a person. And I feel like this was, good experience. It was sometimes difficult experience, but, in the long run, it obviously made me a better and wiser person.
Now, what about your experience playing at Webster University, known for their chess program? What was that like?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I was there for 2 years because I actually went to Brooklyn College between 2007 and 2009. And then I decided to take a break from college to try to focus on my chess career. Once I realized that I have a legitimate chance of becoming a grandmaster and even like a very strong grandmaster, and I realized that I can probably coach as well. So I didn't really see as big of a point of going a traditional career path. So I, kind of took a 10-year break. And then I decided, ultimately to go to Webster and finish my degree because I thought, there are several factors. I made that decision in 2019. And it was a point where I just wanted to, kind of move out for a couple of years and just, live independently on my own. Wanted to get that experience. That's something I haven't really experienced before. And also I was thinking, being part of a chess team or being around very strong players, maybe that can give a boost to my chess career. And I think that the coaches were fantastic there. At that time, there was Susan Polgar and Paul Trong, who actually ended up retiring the same year that I graduated, interestingly enough. Now their head coach is 2700 FIDE Grandmaster Le Quang Lim, who is a former graduate from Webster. He's also very good. But yeah, anyway, at that time, they were very good. They, Susan would and Paul would focus a lot on the psychology aspect, and especially Paul and Susan would also focus a lot on the technical aspect of chess and analytical part. There was a lot of discipline. Every week we had chess trainings, puzzle solving competitions. We played training games with each other. We prepared really seriously for all the big collegiate events. And Susan would even help me during my own big events, let's say when I traveled to a big tournament. So it was really, really helpful there. The coaching there was fantastic. It's just too bad that I was there less than 2 years, and most of it was during COVID, so there were not as many tournaments. But even during that COVID time, we still, even when most tournaments were online, we still did a lot of serious preparation. Like, for example, Susan helped me a lot in that online qualifier for the, which that year, 2020, when US Open got canceled, they had this online qualifier instead of the US Open to try to get into the US Championship, which I ended up winning, which got me into 2021 US Championship. And Susan played a big role in helping me during that tournament. So even though most of the over-the-board chess tournaments were shut down, online there was still a lot of opportunities, a lot to play for. So, a lot of credit goes to Susan and Paul for their amazing coaching. And, especially they helped me, I think, a lot with my psychological weaknesses, which I still have, but I feel like much less now than I did like a few years ago.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I was writing this down as you were speaking. When you say they helped you with the psychological aspect of the game, can you elaborate on that a little bit? I'm curious. I don't want you to give away any state secrets or anything. I'm curious when you say they helped you with the psychological aspect, what they taught you.
Well, I think, I think in a lot of ways, it's just like Paul would emphasize in a lot of ways positive thinking. Like I've always been a little bit too, I have to admit I'm a little bit like a glass half empty person. That's just naturally how I am. Like I usually see things from a negative point of view. And in chess, it can really hurt you a lot. Like if you keep thinking about negative things, I realized it actually does affect your chess. And I started to realize that especially like last year. I started reflecting and like it, because it wasn't just Susan and Paul who would tell me those things. It would also be my coach Georgi Kachishvili, with whom I worked for over 10 years, and also have a good friend who's a strong IM, probably going to be a GM. He's we help each other at tournaments. We're like good, chess training partners. He also tells me a lot about that. And like when several credible people keep telling you about that, it's it's wise to listen. And I feel like definitely when you have like these negative thoughts, even about some non-chess things during a chess tournament, it definitely affects your play. You just end up becoming more lazy. You lazier. You don't calculate as carefully. You don't have that same motivation. Like it might not seem like a big deal, but like when you're playing people around your level, like these little details make a very big difference. And then of course, now that I teach more, and whenever I work with adults, I feel like now I can relate more to these kind of problems that they have, because it's pretty much the same things that I have in a lot of ways, right? It's just like a lot of negativity, a lot of things like that, and just not objective evaluation about certain things. And it does definitely affect chess. It's just at a club level, it becomes more evident and shows up in a more drastic way, whereas at a GM level, it's like more subtle. But like if you go deeply into your games and realize it definitely shows up somehow indirectly. So yeah, that would be my like, for example, I guess one example could be like, for example, about like I used to be afraid of, like I used to be a very safe player. I used to be afraid of like doing something that's unclear or dynamic or shaky, and I would see a lot of negatives in it, and I wouldn't appreciate the positives, right? And then I wouldn't go for it, and then I realized, of course, the engine showed that I should have went for it. And that's just, for example, that's just one example. And once I started becoming more positive, like my last big tournament I played, which I was able to win in St. Louis last year after like a prolonged slump, I was able to win that tournament because I had like a different approach. I was spotting those dynamic ideas. I was managing my time well. I was working hard at the board, and I always had a positive mindset. Even if there were certain things that didn't quite go the way I wanted, I try to look for the positives, because it's very, for a person who's, let's say, glass half empty, it's very easy, very natural to just find some negative in something. Of course, it exists. But for me, I try to look for that challenge to find something positive, even in a negative situation. And then I realized that, man, I mean, there are so many positives, even in a negative situation, because first of all, it's just a chess game. There could be so much worse things that can happen other than, like, let's say, having a bad position on the chess game. And second of all, even within a bad chess position or something not going well, it can always be worse. Like, let's say you blunder something like a positional idea or even like a pawn. Chances are you don't have to resign just yet. So you can always say, well, could have been worse. I could have blundered the queen. By having this wrong approach, it could have just been that the game is over beyond salvation. But here, yes, it's not great that I missed it, but at least I'm still in the game, and I can still come back, right? So that would be like, let's say, a positive way of looking at a situation. And that's something that I definitely try to practice much more, both in chess and in life.
Sometimes looking at it almost pessimistically, like that glass half empty, can that help you in some ways? Like you look at a move and you're like, oh, wait a minute, maybe there's something wrong with it. And then that negative attitude makes you realize, oh, wait, it is a blunder. Are there times where, that sort of viewpoint can actually benefit you?
I think it depends on the person. I think it's very individual. For a person who's naturally too optimistic, I think sometimes seeing some negatives and seeing some caution could be good. But since I'm more naturally glass half empty, for me, it's important to try to balance more on the positive side, right? Because the best is to be kind of in between glass half empty and glass half full, or let's say in between type A personality and type B personality, right? So finding that balance, the middle ground, is the key. So once you see where you're swaying, you want to try to kind of sway yourself a little bit towards the middle, like different direction. And sometimes you can end up over pushing, but overall you keep trying, and you keep trying that to find that balance, and you keep working towards that. That's the key to improving, not just for chess, but I think for everything else.
Yeah, find that sweet spot so you're not on one extreme or the other.
Sweet spot, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about your win at the 2021 U.S. Open.
It was, it was 8.5 out of 9. I started 8-0. I started 8-0, and then I just needed a draw in the last round to win the tournament, and I chickened out. I had a better end game, and my opponent offered me a draw, and I probably shouldn't lose it like almost ever, but I didn't spend enough time to try to really find the best plan, and I didn't see the winning plan, and I took the draw because I thought, okay, even though I'm better, I mean, who knows? Yeah, I mean, well, what's the point of, I already clinched clear first. But of course, yeah, going 9-0 would have been nice historical result. I should have just spent a bit more time probably, and discipline my calculation a bit better instead of looking at the same line over and over again, but look at more different lines, and maybe I would have found this idea in that game. There's this key H5 idea that I didn't see. But anyway, but yeah, it was obviously a great success for me.
Now, I want to ask you, Alex, about the current cheating epidemic that we're experiencing. Just your general thoughts about it, overall, and whether you've been a victim of it yourself, both over the border, online. I'm just curious from your perspective what your take is on the whole thing.
Yeah, of course, it's like everything else. Yeah, I think it is a pandemic. Kind of just as COVID pandemic started. I think parallel to that, the cheating pandemic really started because there were so many people who started to play online, and so naturally, much more people were getting tempted into cheating. And I think a lot of people what I didn't realize that's happened. I thought at first that people would only cheat, to try to win big money in tournaments. I thought that would be the only logical incentive. But then I started to realize that my students actually sometimes are cheating in just training games without anything on the line. And I started to realize that, man, sometimes it's just some people, it's just a big confidence issue. You start going into a losing streak, and then this whole COVID situation, it's like very depressing. And then you fall into this trap. You just want to somehow please your parents. Let's say your dad yelled at you for some bad games, and you just like, okay, I want to play a good game, and then you start cheating. So yeah, I didn't realize that. About 3 months into the pandemic and into this cheating pandemic, I started to realize that yeah, people are actually doing it. It just makes no sense to me, but there are kids. Actually, there are a lot of kids who would just do it in random training games, which are supposed to be there to just help you to get better at chess and good practice. There's no money on the line or anything, but people would do that. And actually, I've realized that in a lot of online scholastic tournaments, there would be sometimes much more cheating than, let's say, in a club tournament where adults are mostly playing, where people are just trying to get better at chess. So for an adult, there's not that much incentive to cheat. But the kids, especially maybe in the age range of like 9 to 12, 13, and like around that age group, were somehow more prone to falling into this trap. Like they wouldn't do it every game, but at some point in their chess career, a lot of them unfortunately dabbled with it, and it's kind of very unfortunate. It makes me wonder if I did something wrong as a coach, if maybe my kind of glass half empty, that maybe I didn't encourage them enough or something like that, and I didn't praise them enough for some games, and that makes me start to wonder if maybe I could do something better. But I feel like a lot of it has to do with the parents as well, and how they're raised and discipline. It's a little bit hard to control. Now, as for me personally, whether I was ever victimized of cheating, I would say that in recent times I haven't really been victimized of cheating. I would say most, pretty much the people I play online are all playing clean, because I've been playing a lot of online big tournaments, since 2020, and even before that I was playing Pro Chess League. But there was one time where I feel like it was a bit unlucky for me when I played Pro Chess League in 2019 to 2020 season, and our team was one team win away from getting into the Final Four, and we were playing a team who was quite strong, and they ended up actually getting disqualified in the final for cheating, officially disqualified, because one of their players was officially banned. He was caught, whatever, by chess.com. I probably shouldn't name names, but probably a lot of people might be able to figure that out anyway. So we played that team, to try to qualify to the Final Four. And, I won my first game against definitely an honest grandmaster. But then my next 3 games, it was like, it just felt like I was, just getting outplayed as if I'm some amateur, like around 2000 level or lower, like 3 games in a row. And actually later on that year, all 3 of those players have been, banned from something, either from leeches or chess.com. So while it hasn't been, there wasn't enough, let's say, evidence that they cheated in that match against us, but the chances are pretty high, I would say. So that was like very unlucky for me at that time and our team, because I remember I put a lot of effort into preparation for that match. I did my absolute best. I played training games. I would consult the team captain, and to get this unlucky, that was probably unfortunate. But of course, that was just the one time. But other than that, okay, maybe in a couple of small tournaments here and there, but nothing too substantial. And actually on that team, I think 5 or 6 players at some point were banned from like some websites. So it's just like this whole team was a bit shaky, and unfortunately, they only got banned after they beat the top team in the finals. So it was it was a bit unlucky for us, but it's life. What to do? Life goes on. Yeah, I mean, the way I see it is that, okay, when there's COVID, it was just when COVID was starting, and the way I look at it is like much bigger unluck would be like to get COVID and like dying or getting long COVID or something like that. So I feel like, okay, I mean, compared to the risk of, let's say, playing over the board and potentially getting a bad case of COVID, I would feel like, okay, like maybe getting cheated by somebody in 1 out of, maybe in like 2% of my games is just not a big deal at all, in relatively speaking. I mean, it does not take away from my enjoyment of playing good players online and playing good tournaments with good prizes and things like that.
Now, the chess.com Pro League, the Pro Chess League, are there like precautions in place? Like, do they have anti-cheating measures? Like, do you have to have a camera on you or something? Do they have measures like that in place for that level of tournament?
Now it got much better. I mean, back then in 2020, it was still, these things were still relatively new. So they did have Zoom, but I think it was just 1 camera, not 2 cameras. And we didn't have to share screen. And I don't even remember if audio had to be on. So there were just so many ways to sidestep it. But nowadays, in official big online tournaments, you have to have 2 cameras, side camera and main camera. So it's much harder to find, let's say, a blind spot. And then you have share screens. So that way, if you have something running on your computer, it gets flagged. And then you have audio. So if somebody can't just be shouting you the moves. So it becomes much, much harder to, let's say, sidestep this kind of setup. Of course, I guess it's always possible. I mean, people are even managing to sometimes cheat over the board. But I mean, if I have to be asked, let's say, is it harder to cheat in a big online tournament under these tight regulations, or in a huge big open tournament with like 1,000 people where people can go to the bathroom over the board? I would even be tempted to say that it's probably harder to cheat in the online big event than, let's say, in some big open. Of course, and that, of course, over the board these days is also a pretty big problem, because people have sophisticated technology and people can somehow use the phone and things like that. And so I would say that cheating could be possible pretty much anywhere. Not likely to happen in a local club with smaller prizes, but in a big tournament like World Open, I mean, it's quite likely that there's going to be at least a few cheaters per year who will try to some scheme, and who knows? Yeah, that's so. that's why I don't really worry about it being online, because I feel like also chess.com has a really good system in place, very good algorithm to catch cheaters. I mean, I think it's improving every year. So, of course, you can always get a bit unlucky, and the cheater might not be there. Might not be enough evidence, let's say, right away. You can always be a bit unlucky, but that's just how life is, right? I mean, it's much better to be unlucky in chess than, let's say, unlucky to get a bad COVID case, or be hit with a war or something like that, like in Ukraine. So I feel like, for chess these days, I just don't worry so much about that. It seems kind of a negligent problem for me these days. And in the last few years, I don't really ever even coming across someone who I would have said. In general, I'm not one of these people who would suspect like someone you would cheat. Even in that Pro Chess League match when I played, like I just felt so bad. I thought I was letting the team down. I was losing all these games. I was like, man, I'm playing so badly. But then, of course, after I checked the games, and like then some other GMs were telling me like, well, yeah, I don't know if the games were clean. And then of course, when that team got banned, okay, now I don't feel as bad. I feel like, okay, I didn't really let my team down. It was just very unlucky circumstances. But basically, since that moment, I feel like, I haven't really come across that much cheating, if at all, online. So and I've played like around 3 years. It was like 3 years ago. So it was like for 3 years in a row, I feel like, it's been pretty smooth in that sense.
Yeah, you mentioned the World Open. I mean, from what I'm hearing, like you said, a lot of these big over-the-board tournaments, that the security isn't always the greatest, especially the big amateur events, the in-person amateur events. So, like you said, that's probably more of a risk than some of these online events with stricter regulations in place.
Yeah, because in person, okay, let's just say you go to a tournament, you travel. Let's say you're traveling from California, you're spending money for plane tickets, food, hotel. Let's say you're spending like $2,000 for the tournament, right? And then in the decisive last round, you run into a cheater and you don't win the money you're supposed to win. I mean, it's very, very painful. Now, if online this thing happened, okay, whatever. I mean, I lost a couple of hours. Let's say on Title Tuesday. Okay, not a big deal. Yeah, I mean, you just play next time, you'll have better luck. I mean, if that happens in like once in like 20 or 50 times or whatever, okay, who cares? It's not a big deal. But like when you go over the board and like go through all the hassle, and then in a decisive moment run into somebody who ended up playing dishonestly, it's just much more painful. Let alone FIDE rating and all these things. So yeah, I think in over the board it's actually much more of a serious problem, which is why it's good that they have tighter regulations in like big tournaments like US Championship. But the problem is in big opens, it's just so hard to do. So but it is what it is. Yeah, the world is not perfect, so you have to live with with accept it as it is, and not much we can do about it.
Right. So let's go to the glass being half full rather than half empty. What have you been up to lately, Alex, as far as tournaments that you're playing in, as far as like any lectures, teaching? Like what have you been doing?
Yeah, I've been teaching a lot. Since I graduated Webster, I realized that I didn't really enjoy my data analytics degree so much. I didn't really enjoy the material. So I realized that probably meant more to be a chess player and a chess coach. And I've been, getting more good students and teaching much more. And so yeah, I've been doing that a lot, like becoming much more successful at that. I'm playing a bit less now. Like my last two very big tournaments I played were last year's US Championship and the next tournament in St. Louis, right after that, where I was able to regain most of the rating I lost earlier in the year, playing like a bunch of opens with underrated kids. But now I'm probably going to be playing much less because I feel like 2 games a day, I just don't play quite as well. Plus, I'm still afraid of COVID, so I wear a mask. And when I play with a mask, I play significantly worse, I found. So that's also a bit of an issue for me. Nowadays, there are a lot of good online tournaments. I recently played a online Airthix Masters. I qualified to the 3rd division. I did quite well there. I got 4th place and I got a very decent prize. So, and I get a chance to play a lot of strong players. So basically, these days, my approach is this: if I want to play strong players, I try to look for good online tournaments, Title Tuesday, and those events on chess.com, which are very good. Pro Chess League, I'm going to be actually playing this season. But in person these days, I try to play the smaller events, which are not FIDE rated, because I don't want to put my rating on the risk against underrated kids who, 2,000 FIDE, maybe 2,300 UCF, something like that. And they play very well. They don't blunder very much. They know their openings well. So it's much harder to get winning chances against these kind of players, especially with black. I noticed you were talking about something like that at the lower level too. But yeah, that's kind of becoming a little bit of a problem, a little bit of a rating deflation, I feel like, at all levels, especially amongst younger players. Yeah, and plus mask, plus 2 games a day, can't really review my lines and prepare as well. And missing lesson time with my students over tournaments. Now it's just becoming less worth it for me to travel a lot. I mean, I might play US Open to try to get back into the US Championship because that's a very prestigious event. Other than that, I just don't know how many big over-the-board events I'll play. But as for small over-the-board events, I play them because, like at the Marshall, because 4 games against lower rateds, I feel like I can manage to win even with the mask and shorter games. So, basically these days, if I want to play stronger events, I play training games with my friends, or I play online tournaments. If I want to play over the board, I would usually look for slightly weaker tournaments where I just try to win money. So I would, that's kind of these days what my approach to chess is. But my main priority, of course, is teaching, because I really enjoy doing it, and I have much more students now, and I have some very promising students, and I really want to make sure I help them to my maximum. And I feel like in chess, once you start becoming a coach, that should be the priority number one. You start becoming very responsible for your students, and I want to do my absolute best. So that starts to become my priority now over playing a lot of tournaments.
Going back to what you said about rating deflation, yeah, we're seeing it even at the club level as well. So is it, because sometimes I think, do I talk about that too much? Do I sound like I'm just complaining? But, you get these kids, even adults, even like I'm calling them kids because of my age, but they're in their 20s, rated, quote unquote 1,000 or 1,200 or 1,300, and they're, beating or drawing 1,900 players. So, we see it down at the club level as well. So it's definitely more challenging, and the players are a lot stronger. It's like you said before, their ratings really aren't catching up to their strength.
Yeah, I think that's because, these days there's just so much information readily available. Chessable is very convenient to learn. Opening much more convenient than, let's say, a chess book. It's much easier to do a lot of tactics regularly. Can play a lot of good online tournaments, practice easily. So yeah, it's just like these days you have YouTube videos which will give you a lot of tips sometimes. So it's like you can play much more tournaments. So it's just a lot of things are just become much more readily available now compared to, let's say, in the past. And that's why people could, if they really want to, they could improve quite fast. And so that means that I'm playing some strong kids, and I have to always be at my absolute best shape if I want to beat them consistently. And like my expected score, let's say against the 2,000 FIDE player who's, let's say, a low master, would be 98%. Whereas in the past, maybe it was realistic. Now it's just completely unrealistic for me to beat a master 98%, because they play well. They don't make too many mistakes, and you have to beat them on some nuances, and you're not always going to be in your absolute A shape, and these days that's another reason why I play less over the board now. I want to make sure I'm always in good shape. If I play online training game and I'm not in good shape, okay, whatever, but I don't want to leak FIDE points by not being in my best shape. And if I'm not in my best shape, these kids, they definitely will punish you. And they're not even that afraid of grandmasters anymore, which is the scary part for me. Like, I would offer some kids draws from slightly worse position. They would just decline it, so that's very impressive.
We were talking about that. I had on a friend from the club, and yeah, these kids, they just want to throw down. They don't care. It's not like, oh, okay, you're a grandmaster, so what? I'm playing to win. H4, whatever.
No, but that's good. I mean, that's what I teach my students, not to take draws and play for a win. I mean, that's good that people have this approach. It just makes much hard. I mean, it just makes it much harder to play these open tournaments. I'm not even talking about the potential cheating factor, right? I mean, don't even get me started on that one. But yeah, I mean, even without the cheating, yeah, they just play well. They just play well. Like I remember, I played a talented kid in 2,200 feet at World Open. I feel like I played a very good game, no mistakes. I was black. The problem was my opponent also played no mistakes. He also played like nearly the perfect game, and it became a draw. So like, what was I supposed to do? I mean, he just played well. So I played my normal level. I mean, maybe Magnus Carlsen would have managed to pose a little bit more problems, but I'm not Magnus Carlsen. I can play at the level I'm capable of playing, but I can't really go that much higher. So what am I supposed to do? Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's like you said, if they're not blundering, if they're just playing a clean game, it's hard to.
They're not even making that many positional blunders. Yeah, and they know their openings. So it's like if I'm black, it's just like the room to outplay them becomes much much narrower. Yeah, I mean, it's just much harder. I mean, yeah, sometimes they do make mistakes and you can still punish them, but it's not nearly as frequent as, let's say, even 10, 12 years ago.
So, Alex, what does your study regimen look like now? I'm not sure if you're playing, if you're studying a little bit, if you still study several hours a day. I'm just curious, even with everything you've achieved, what that looks like for you, your study plan.
Well, now I wouldn't say I'm a professional anymore. So now it's a little bit like all over the place because, I would say my days are more preoccupied with teaching and collecting material for my students and sometimes playing tournaments. So to be honest, I wouldn't say I'm studying that much, but usually I go over my games. So every game I play, I go over then the opening, see where I could have played better. I review my file and see where I maybe made a mistake or where I didn't know the line. I try to see, what kind of mistakes I'm making and try to correct that. So I definitely still analyze my games. I still try to do tactics every day, although lately I haven't been as disciplined with that. But maybe the fact that I'm playing a lot, maybe online training games, online tournaments, and maybe over the board sometimes kind of compensates. So I'm always engaged in chess every day. But as for like formal studying, I'm not doing very much. But I know that before US Championship and those big tournaments, I basically dedicated two months to really very disciplined approach. I would work a lot on my openings, on my physical shape, on my tactics calculation. I tried to be as disciplined as I could because I thought, okay, this might be my last chance to play US Championship. And I want to do my absolute best. But now I feel like, okay, it's, I just always want to try to get better. But right now my main priority is teaching. So these days when it comes to my own chess, I'm not as disciplined. However, if I do get invited into a great tournament like US Championship, some big tournament, then with classical time control, then I would probably want to spend like at least a few weeks to really work very hard on my calculation. So that would be kind of, it will be a little bit of an unpleasant work, but like I think before a big tournament, that's what I would do. And I feel like I wouldn't join a very big tournament unless I would have been able to train my calculation very hard right before that, unless I feel like I would be able to go into that tournament with optimal form. So that's why these days I'm also very selective in terms of what over-the-board tournaments I meant FIDE-rated tournaments I play. Over-the-board Marshall, okay, whatever, I can play, but I meant FIDE-rated tournaments. I'm much more selective now that I only want to play when it really makes sense for me, rather than just play, everything that looks good,
So for this last segment, I want to tap into your role as a teacher and working with club players. I was hoping you could share some difficulties that are often encountered when it comes to club players improving.
Yeah. So far in my chess teaching career, I've had varied success with kid students. In fact, some kid students have really improved a lot with me. I've had a lot of success, but I wish I could say the same thing about my adult students, but to be quite frank with you, I haven't yet had so much success with adult students. And by success, of course, I mean let's say improving by one class. So for example, 1600 adult going to 1800, improving the level significantly, or 1800 to 2000, or expert to master. Like I haven't been able to, help my students with that. So I feel like there could be, maybe partially it could be that my approach to adults hasn't always been so good, and I feel like a lot of it maybe has to do with me. Like for example, kids are, very often don't have that baggage with like negativity and stuff, but with adults, I think it's a little bit tricky, because they play for a long time and they've gotten burned by certain things, and then there's like there's some wounds hidden in there, like some trauma from past experiences, and then as a result there's much more kind of overthinking, hesitating, lack of self-confidence, and all these things matter. And I feel like maybe what I need to do better as a coach in that regard is that maybe when I work with adult students or people who in general have problems with confidence, is to, let's say, celebrate every little accomplishment, right? Even if they, let's say, lose the game, try to really find some really positive things within that game. Maybe even a little bit over exaggerated, but sometimes with some students, maybe that's the better approach, because if I try to be a little bit too objective, maybe that's not good. Yeah, because sometimes they start looking at it like a math problem, and then they start realizing that they're not so good, and then that really, makes them lose even more confidence. And then, of course, without confidence, it's it's just much harder. Yeah, because I feel like confidence is a very big part of your chess success, right? If you always only look at the games with the computer and see how many mistakes you make, and if your coach keeps criticizing you, you start overthinking everything, maybe quite easily, and then start getting into time pressure and not trusting yourself. Just factors like this, and then you end up having, let's say, at some point a bad result because maybe you didn't have a best day in your family or something else happened in your life, and then you're in a slump, and then before you know it, you're psychologically in a bad shape, and then it becomes a vicious circle, right? And I feel like with kids, they overcome that much easier. So that's the one thing that I've maybe had a difficulty with adults. I feel like usually what happens is that after working with me, they improve on their knowledge, and they definitely start seeing chess in a different way. They might even improve significantly on certain parts of the game. But I think the difficulties becomes sustaining that level, right? Like it's like, for example, one or two tournaments, let's say an 1800 player might play like an expert, like a 2100. But then very often it would be a relapse in some other tournament, going back to some old habits. It's like, for example, let's say somebody is a smoker or alcoholic or drug addict. It's very hard for someone like that. It may be easy for them to, let's say, not do it for a week, but to sustain it and not go back to it, well, that's kind of a whole different ball game, right? It's much more difficult. And I feel like it's the same with any bad habits when it comes to life or chess or whatever, even just simple thing like laziness. It's if you have a certain bad habit, you can't just say, okay, I fixed it for one or two tournaments and then now I'm good. No, it's actually something you have to always, it always requires maintenance, because that's something you've had for so long. Yeah. And I feel like with kids, it's different because they haven't had some bad habits developed for a long time. And it's much easier to, let's say, get rid of it. Like if a kid who has time pressure problems, it's easy to tell them, play a little bit faster, and then they actually learn. Like, for example, Jan Nepomniachtchi used to be a time pressure addict when he was a kid. And nowadays, he's playing fast. He's playing kind of at a normal pace because his coach told him like some good approaches. With an adult, it's just much harder, right? And I have a kid who actually, when he was working with me, he would actually be a time pressure addict, but like he was able to actually fix it pretty nicely and in 2 to 3 months. Now he plays, sometimes he actually plays too fast now, ironically enough, right? So it's kind of interesting though for kids. I've seen that with kids, but they were time pressure addicts, but then they can really, let's say, get better very quickly because that bad habit hasn't really cemented itself in their personality yet, right? But when somebody is an adult and they've been an addict, time pressure addict for, let's say, 30 years, yes, they can really, if they really think about it all the time during the tournament, being in absolute best form, yes, they can improve on that for 1 or 2 tournaments. But can they sustain it? I think that's the big question. And I feel like sustainability is the one thing that I've had. In order to improve significantly, like over 100 points, maybe 200 points, like a whole class, you have to be able to sustain. You have to be able to really avoid these relapses, right? Because all it's, like you mentioned many times, it's so easy to just have a relapse and lose a bunch of rating, and then confidence goes away, and then you just start from square one, right? So I feel like that's kind of that's like one difficulty that I've come across so far with adult club players. And then the other thing that's been maybe a little bit difficult is simply just like let's say they reach a certain level of tactical abilities and calculation. It's just becomes so much harder to actually get it to the next level. Let's say the calculation abilities. It's just that I noticed like the big difference between kids and adults. It's just that adults just don't calculate usually quite as fast. It's like the analytical skills are just not always there. The knowledge is usually very good at a very high level. They might have knowledge of let's say an 1800 can easily have knowledge of a strong master, right? But the analytical skills, those are the ones that are, much more difficult to improve. And when you're a kid, you improve on those things just so naturally. You don't have to even think about it. It's like learning a language, or even some other things like learning how to swim or learning karate, like all these other activities where you learn some body movements so naturally as a kid. But like when you're an adult, it's so much harder. Like I can say with my own personal experience, like with chess, I never had to experience that because I learned as a kid and chess always came naturally for me. So in terms of chess, I can't really relate as well to those problems. But I've, let's say, tried to learn some other things like martial arts and swimming and driving and those other things. And I have to say, it's just an immense struggle. It's an immense struggle. And I feel like, for some 5-year-old kid, they just, grasp those patterns and so easily, right? But like, for example, something like driving or swimming or let's say karate, those things, they require you to maintain, let's say, 5 things at the same time, right? 5 different movements. You have to keep 5, let's say, things all in your head at the same time. A kid does it naturally. For an adult, it's much harder. And I feel like it's similar in chess, right? When you're a chess player, you have to think about this principle, this analytical approach, this, a lot of things at the same time. Now, kid, they do it naturally. Adult, they have to always think with using their head. It's like not in their blood as much. And that's why it's just so hard to really reach that next level. And I can very much, I feel relate to that thanks to the difficulties I've had in learning some non-chess skills. So I would say those are like the 3 things, like confidence, sustainability, and just purely, the pattern recognition, I guess I'll just call it. Those are the 3 things that I've experienced difficulties in terms of helping adults improve. Having said all that, I feel like if you really, really, really work hard and if you want it badly enough, you could probably overcome that, right? But it's just like immensely harder, right? It might be like 5-10 times harder, but it's not impossible. It's just harder to do. And that's why so few people do it. And once, people do it for a little bit and they realize it's hard, it's easy to also get negative and give up, right? So that's also another thing. So that's those are the the difficulties that I've sort of came across when it comes to teaching adults.
What I think is fascinating about that explanation is the juxtaposition of the way kids learn versus adults learn. I like how you took those 2 lanes and compared them side by side, because most people, they just speak about adult improvers, like most chess teachers or GMs. Well, adult improvers, this is what they're dealing with. But you compared the process to when children learn and why it's different. And I think a lot of it is that adults, many of them anyway, they can't get out of their own way, or they can't shake these habits, or they're just stubborn or in denial about the bad habits that they have. So they learn other chess knowledge that they think is going to help them, but they're not ditching the bad habits that are still there. So is that kind of a correct characterization of what you're saying?
Yeah, partially. Yeah, I think. Yeah, well, I mean, I'm not saying that they don't want to. I'm not saying that they're stubborn necessarily. They just don't have enough strong will to really persevere and push that extra mile to do it, right? That's the thing. Like, I think they want to, but they want to kind of do it naturally and easily, right? We don't want to have to really work that extra mile for something, right? And I feel like for adults to break a certain bad habit, it's just like 5-10 times harder, right? It's like for us, it's much harder for a smoker who's smoked for 20 years to quit than for someone who just like smoked for, let's say, 1 month to stop, right? Although either one is hard, but it's you get my point. Yeah, it's once a certain bad habit has really solidified in your life, it's really it becomes very hard to break it, right? And I feel like that's the hard part. It's not like they don't want. I mean, some people maybe don't want it, but the people who I've worked with, they do want it, but because people who don't want it, they just don't take lessons. They just say, okay, I'm at that level. I'm okay with where I'm at. I'm just playing for fun and right. And sometimes you can be an adult enjoyer. Yeah, you can just play for fun, play at the club, just enjoy the game and not analyze the game and just not care and just say, okay, whatever. I played that level. It's fun for me to play and that stuff like that. But the people who do take lessons, they usually want to get better. They want to try to break it, but it's just very hard for them. And at some point, they just they could do it for some time, but very often they relapse. Yeah, and I think that's the hard part. It's the sustainability part, which is really difficult.
No, that's great stuff, Alex. So some excellent advice for adult improvers and club players. So most of the listeners out there, I'm sure, are going to really get some good takeaways from that. So Alex, I'm going to let you go. I really appreciate your insight, really appreciate you coming on the podcast today. Thank you.
Oh, no problem. I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy hopefully this advice I gave will be helpful.
Absolutely. No, I enjoyed listening to it now, but when I play this back, when I'm not sort of in recording mode, I definitely look forward to playing this back and really absorbing it even more. So Grandmaster Alex Lenderman, thanks again. And for those of you at home, as always, I hope you win your next game. Have a great day.